Hi, everyone. Thanks a lot for coming today. Hang on a sec. I'm just going to put my phone away. It's really a pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today, Sharon Louden. Let me say a little bit about her and a little bit about how the format's going to work today. So Sharon's going to speak from up here at the podium and show some images and sort of get things started. And then she and I are going to sit down together and have a bit of a Q&A session, and then we'll open it up to people from the audience to ask questions to Sharon as we go along. So a little bit about Sharon. So Sharon got her BFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and her MFA from Yale University. She is an artist, educator, advocate for artists, and the editor of Living and Sustaining a Creative Life series of books. That includes two books that I happen to have here. Living and Sustaining a Creative Life, and Artist as Culture Producer. And we're going to be talking about what those books cover today, and the insights that she's gotten from a lot of the people that she's interviewed about what that can mean for people, and it means a lot of different things. These books were published by Intellect Books and distributed by University of Chicago Press. Sharon's work, her own artwork, has been exhibited in numerous venues, including the Aldridge Contemporary Art Museum, the Drawing Center, Birmingham Museum of Art, Weatherspoon Art Museum, and the Kemper Museum of Contemporary Art. Her work is held in major public and private collections, including the Whitney Museum, National Gallery of Art, Newberger Museum of Art, Arkansas Art Center, Yale University Art Gallery, and the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, among others. Sharon is a faculty member in the MFA Fine Arts program at the School of Visual Arts in New York, and she's also a senior critic at the New York Academy of Art, where she organizes a lecture series which involves interviewing luminaries and exceptional individuals in the art world, and both from New York and from people who are visiting New York as well. Sharon's first book, Living and Sustaining a Creative Life, is now in its 7th printing, so it's captured a lot of people's interest. She has sales in over 18 countries, and it's become the #1 selling publication of her publisher. The book has been translated into Korean, garnered numerous reviews, been the subject of 15 podcasts and various radio appearances, and received countless feedback from individuals who are sharing their stories about their own creative lives. Her second book, The Artist as Culture Producer, was officially launched in March of 2017 and is already in its 2nd printing. And Sharon's in the middle of an extensive tour of the book, and that's part of what brings her here today. She's also working on a 3rd book, The Last Artist Standing, which will focus on artists over 50 years of age. I think she said they're artists from 50 to 85, going on 86, who are in her book. She's got a plan to publish even more books, as many as 10, concentrating on all art forms edited by experts in each field. So not just in the visual arts, but also in theater, dance, and music, and looking at how one sustains a creative life in a whole variety of different artistic fields. So it's my pleasure to introduce Sharon, friend and fellow artist, fellow arts advocate. Welcome, Sharon.
Get started, I always love to take a picture of people in the audience, so I want to take a picture of all of you. So can you just say hi? Is that okay? Because this will go out into the world. So you ready? Oh, ready to say hi? You getting your hair together? Ready? Come on, people. To say 1, 2, 3. Oh, that was really weak. Listen, I lived here in Minnesota. I know it's hard for you to express yourselves with feeling polite, okay? Can you drop that for a second and just show me all your creativity? Even you can raise your hands and say hello. Ready? 1, 2, 3, do it. Okay, awesome. Thank you very much. You'll see that everywhere if you follow me. Okay, did we get in the mood for this? Okay. So I can walk around, right? Alex, can I walk around? You can hear me, right? Anyway, because I'm pretty loud, right? Loud and clear. So Jay, thank you so much. Where's Jay? Thank you so much for having me. And did you already know that Jay's an artist? I see Jay as an artist first and foremost, but also a president of a school is very much an extension of being an artist. So that's what has a lot to do with also what I'm going to talk about today. So I'm just going to give a brief, I'm going to try to keep this really brief and fly through this PowerPoint. So a lot of people know me from my books and they say, wow, you must be an author. I'm like, no, I'm an artist, okay? And I just want to prove to you that I'm an artist. So I do all different forms. Very interesting, some of the students that we had lunch with earlier shared their introduction to their work by media. And I actually think media serves me in just expressing my vocabulary. So I'm not a painter, I'm not a sculptor, I'm just an artist. I'm not an author. I'm not an installation artist, I'm just an artist. So I do all different media, but I'm going to show some projects. So this is a project that actually started in 2004 at Munson Williams Proctor, and it's one idea that just transformed. Munson Williams Proctor is in Utica, New York, and I like to make environments with small forms that are like anthropomorphic. I call them anthropomorphic characters that then take over, and I try to create more inclusive environments for interaction. So that idea, I like to sit on ideas and then have them reconfigured in different places over time. So then 6 years later, this was at Project 4 Gallery in Washington, and I just took that idea and kept building on it. And then, I don't know if anybody saw this, this was at the Weissman Art Museum in 2011. I thought I would bring some Minnesota back to Minnesota, my Minnesota, in Minneapolis. This was a project that I did in the celebration of Frank Gehry's edition at the Weissman Art Museum. This is 3,000 square feet, 350,000 strips of aluminum, 20,000 screws, and 20 pounds of glue. And there's my husband right there. So my husband's right here is Vincent Villega. He's my beautiful love of my life. But anyway, so I also love to create these environments with other people. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit right now. I like to take advantage of large projects to fit in the budget, and I'm going to talk about money today because I think it's really important to be open about money. To be able to pay artists a living wage, and by doing that, set the normal, even higher standard, and that artists should be just integral in society. So for this project, for 5 weeks, we hired students from University of Minnesota, which I loved, and it was like a residency program. The other thing I like to do is I like making my work transparent. So when I do a museum exhibition, I usually have like a label that says, feel free to Instagram me, and I'll Instagram you back, and we can have a dialogue. So at the Asheville Art Museum, for 2 years, 10 to 25 people a week would Instagram. And because I work with aluminum, which is highly reflective, it's perfect for selfies. So I like to do that. This is also at the Tweed Museum in Duluth, not that long ago. This was up for 2 years as well. This high reflective aluminum sheeting created an opportunity for people to feel like they can not only see themselves, but be a part of the architecture that's transformed with just my inserting my gestures. Okay, so that's a little bit, did I prove that I was an artist? Maybe you can look on my website and I can prove it more. But I'm an artist too by doing these books. So as Jay mentioned, and this is why we're here today, why I'm here today, I was approached in 2011 to write a book. I actually was did a panel discussion at the College Art Association conference, and it was called How to Make a Living with or Without a Gallery Dealer. 400 people showed up at that. And I'll never forget telling the people in the audience, wow, it's really great that you're here, and it really sucks that you're here, because it shows that you're so dependent on this system. And I think there are many ways to sustain a creative life. I know there are, just aside from including a gallery system, but not just solely the commercial market. So I graduated from Yale University with $115,000 in debt. That's the equivalent of $206,000 today. I paid those debts off in 10 years as an artist. My husband and I came up with creative financing, as well as I applied for everything that fit, and I got some great public art projects. And at the time when I graduated from Yale in 1991, I didn't find a great community of artists for exchange or sharing. People were holding things too close. So when my publisher said, I want you to write a book, I said, I can't even write an artist statement. I'm not going to write a book. Does everybody know what that is? Those painful artist statements? And she said, well, what would you want to do? And I said, I'm still frustrated by artists not sharing enough with one another. So I'd like for artists to share with us a little bit about how they sustain a creative life. So in my first book, it was just started as a conversation. These 40 people that I picked, 19 people from New York, 19 people from the rest of the country, 2 people from Europe, 1 person from St. Cloud, Minnesota, actually in this book. I would just say that the reason why I chose New York is because I lived in New York for 23 years, had a house fire, moved to Minneapolis for 3 years, and then I've just moved back to New York because I have a job there pretty much, and I have friends I grew up with there. So from that house fire in 2013, and my life has changed a lot from little traumas, and parts of my personal life has really defined the chapters of my life in a lot of ways, like the debt, and like and paying that debt, and like this house fire, and living a block and a half away from the World Trade Center, 9/11. Those things really have changed how I look at the world. So when we had this house fire, I just did a couple book events, and I said to Vince, why don't we extend the book tour, because we had no idea where we were going to live. So we were homeless for 229 days and did a 62-stop book tour when we moved to Minneapolis. So the book tour started, the fire was in Christmas night 2013, and it ended, the 229 days ended in August of 2014. So from that, it went bananas. So this tour started out just as me showing this book, and then I thought, how can I empower and use this book as an opportunity like any artist would do? What we do is we take things and make things bigger. We plant seeds for more growth and opportunities for others. I want to believe that at least my artist friends and I do this. So I said, let me use this book as a platform. So what we did was I would have moderated conversations with different people, and then we'd open it up to the audience, and this is what I'd love for you to answer today too. What do you need and what do you want? Because for me, when artists don't necessarily know what they need, but they know what they want, or vice versa, it's extremely powerful. And when somebody in the audience says what they need or what they want, what happens is somebody else in the audience can maybe even satisfy what they need and want. But by just asking for that and getting it out into the world is a big step towards making progress in not only bringing people together, but also resolving those issues. So that tour just went crazy. It was awesome. We went all over the place. And I basically, the way publishers don't build tours unless you're like in the 0.001% of people who make a lot of money in publishing. Just like the art world only 0.001% really just sustain their lives consistently with a gallery. So, and as depressing as some of you may think that is, it's actually incredibly empowering, because that means it opens the door for so many other things. It's the best time ever to be an artist, because there's so many opportunities out in the world. Doesn't that guy look like a serial killer? He does, right? After this, he's going to take that hand and then kill me. Anyway, he's a contributor to my book, Blaine. And I felt like I was in that truck all the time when I was on the road with Vince. So here are the statistics from that tour, just to go over briefly, like all the places we went to. We met over 5,000 people on that tour, that first tour. We tweeted everything out. We collectively had so much activity, and it started from a Kickstarter campaign that just kept it going. So for the second book, my publisher said, would you want to do a second book? I was like, yes, because I learned so much from meeting people on that first tour. And the reason why it's called The Artist as Culture Producer is that when I would introduce artists on this tour, on these events, the public would look at me like, oh, another Vincent van Gogh. Did you know that Van Gogh died in 1890? It's like the public doesn't know that Vincent van Gogh actually died. Did I offend anybody, or you hurt in knowing that? I'm sorry I broke that to you, but it's like, it's ridiculous. And but when I would say an artist is a culture producer, they'd be like, huh, what is that? I don't believe that we should change who we are, but I do believe that the public should see who we are. So that's what these stories aim to be. So I really believe also in sustainability. The publishing model is, if you get a contract for a book to edit an anthology, the editor makes all of the profit. I don't think that's fair. So I split all the royalties with all of the artists. Now, all the royalties, like there's a lot of them, no. Look at my checks that I've written out, $10.04 per person. That was amazing. The highest check we have is $51.26, but that's not the point. The point is that I'm trying to make it sustainable. And also, everybody gets their own copyright, which is also unusual. The Artist as Culture Producer book tour, though, is fully sustainable. It's sustainable by venues paying for us to actually come and speak. Our expenses are paid or shared with other places, and then we also made Living and Sustaining Creative Life a fiscally sponsored entity to raise money. And so my husband is videotaping this today. We're compiling data. What that means is not what I'm necessarily saying, but what Jay is going to ask me and the answers I give to Jay, but also what all of you are going to say is on a recording and a part of a data bank that I just received a grant for to be able to disperse worldwide. Oh, yeah, I forgot. The other thing is, if you want to participate right now on this, you can always take photographs or quote or whatever you want to do, and using the hashtag #LiveSustain. So speaking of support and the partners I work with, I received a grant from the Ford Foundation to go to marginalized communities all over the world. And here are my partners. I'm on the board of the Elizabeth Foundation for the Arts. I work for the Joe Mitchell Foundation. I'm on the founding advisory board of the New York Academy of Art. Wage, everybody take a screenshot of this. Every artist in this room should take a screenshot of this. Wageforwork.com. Has anybody ever heard of it? Yes, you have, right? A few. This was actually started by an artist, Lise, who believed that artists should be paid. I believe artists should be paid, but artists have always struggled with asking how to get paid and what to get paid, because the art world isn't regulated. So, which I find to be problematic, and I also find it to be problematic that it's not transparent. It should be. I'd like for it to be more and more transparent. It's often very opaque. So she created, along with other founders of Wage, this nonprofit organization and a fee calculator that you can go to in case you want to ask somebody who's giving you an opportunity, you want to ask for a certain amount of money to be paid. The other people I work with are all of these organizations, and in the Tremaine Foundation, I'm a big advocate for this, the nonprofit organization, Emily Hall Tremaine Foundation, but this program that they run called artistthrive.org. And what this is a rubric for professional development, and it's free, and it's organic, and it's still growing. This website that just started a month ago. So if you want to check that out, I highly recommend it. The Emily Hall Tremaine Foundation is an organization that truly believes that individual artists are agents for change, as I do. Okay, so a little bit about this tour before I meet with Jay. Don't these guys look like mountain men? Look at that ceiling, right? Don't they look like mountain men? They're contributors to my second book. So this is Steve Lambert, and that's Khaled Safsabi. Part of this book, what's really important for me about this book, is half of the people in this book I didn't know before approaching them. I did a lot of vetting. And the criteria that I have for picking people for these books are the following. You have to be generous and give to other artists. You consistently give to other artists. Be transparent, open, have great examples of risk-taking and new models by which can be replicated. So these two are two of the most generous people I know. That Steve and Khaled, they had never met before. Steve was going to be in Australia. Khaled lives in Sydney. Steve's from New York, upstate New York. They both came together, and now they're going to collaborate together based on this book. That's what should happen with a platform to do for change. So other people in this book that are very important to me, Harag Vartanian, and I would take a screenshot and follow him. You can blame it on me and just tell him. Everybody who knows me knows I love this man. He is the editor-in-chief of Hyperallergic. Has anybody ever heard of that? Hyperallergic.com. It's a free newsletter. It's the #1 blogazine in the world. It's tremendous. And he really believes that artists are, as I said, agents of change, but can really move the world, as I believe. So what's great about him, and this was at the Strand when we launched this, is that he's the most open and accessible critic. And when you have a critic and an artist together, things happen. I do believe there are no divisions in the art world. Everybody has something to offer, and there's ripe opportunities for partnerships. Often. These are a lot of the contributors from my second book. You can see all of their faces at the Strand when we launched. And some of the people just from that book who've done exceptionally amazing, exceptional things are like Edgar Arsenault, who just directed a play of his and Ben Vereen, the actor, starred in that play, and it's on tour. He also won the Performer Prize in 2015, and he does these beautiful drawings and shows with Suzanne Velmeter in Los Angeles. What he also did was he started a project called Watts House Project, which is a nonprofit organization that was about beautifying that area. He's no longer with that anymore, but he started it, and as an artist. Sharon Butler, I don't know if anybody's ever heard of Two Coats of Paint. She came here to MCAD. Jay was so kind to bring her here. She's very generous. She started this blog because she was stuck in her attic in Mystic, Connecticut, and said, I need a community of painters. That blog now is an award-winning blog. She also does something where she has a residency program where she, about 3 or 4 times a year, rents out a week of her studio to an artist, and her studio is in an amazing place in Dumbo, New York, and that's very generous, and she puts them on their blog and goes to their open studio. That's her there as well. She's amazing. I love her. These two are dynamic duo. Those of you who are interested in teaching, you need to talk to them. Tim and Zoe, they are fantastic. And Vince, can you get a picture of this and tweet this out to them? Because I know they're watching from afar. Those two worked together at American University. They were hired in 2014, and 14 years ago, sorry, not 2014, I'm rushing. And what they decided to do was, said, we're going to collaborate, not only going to teach here, but we're going to turn American University upside down. And they did. What they did was they established partnerships with the museums and nonprofit organizations in Washington, D.C. That's where American University is located. They also started their own project space called Syndicate, where they host shows by artists just doing experimental work that they would never have an opportunity to do. They go to studio visits all over the country, and then they just signed a contract with me in my first book in this series that Jay said before, that I just signed this contract of 10 years of books that's called Living and Sustaining a Creative Life, Academia and the Arts. And by them choosing people who are teaching and reframing academia today, maybe we can change it. That would be amazing. So that's them and Edgar. We've had amazing times on this tour. This is at Area 405 in Baltimore, where we had 100 people come for a dinner and then conversations for 5 hours about what people need and want. This was in Cleveland on this tour, 120 people, again, people speaking out about what they needed in that city. They wanted more connection with the museums there into their own neighborhoods. At the Walker Art Center here, I don't know if anybody came here, we talked about mostly women and people of color. We had Gracie Horn and Tia Simone Gardner, and I'm going to be with Tia at McAllister on Thursday night, and it'll be interesting to have a conversation with her again. And Harag was there with us too. And then at 21C Museum Hotel, we're there in Durham, North Carolina, and then also in Cincinnati. And then sometimes what I do, when I see students, and I was saying to Jay, this last night to Jay, where it looks like that it's like many deers in headlights, and they don't know what to say, or they're frightened by, I guess, by me, or me being on a stage. So I hand out cards or pieces of paper, and I say, okay, instead of publicly asking questions, why don't you write them down? We'll try to answer them. So here are some of the questions that have been asked on this tour. What makes you feel most vulnerable as an artist? Can I cultivate a sense of confidence in myself on a day-to-day basis? Now, this has a cuss word, so I'm sorry if I offended anybody. I apologize. In today's political climate, how can one person or group or persons make an impactful statement without coming across negatively or a bleep, bleep, bleep? Through graphic design as an art form, I often ask myself, and have the conversation with those around me. Through art, what can we do? That's actually what everybody in this room should be asking themselves. Through art, what can we do? What does it mean to be artist citizen? This was at Maine College of Art and Design. This was at Pratt. How do you create generosity when no one around you is reciprocating? That's a very sad question, but we answered it. How, when you first start as an artist, do you connect with people who are not interested in community building and helping one another? I can answer that. When being paid for a piece of work, how do you know you aren't being cheated out of the value of your work? That question lends itself to the idea that you are going to be cheated out of it, and it means that the system is flawed. And this is my favorite one. Artists must be relevant to their communities beyond their work. Partnerships with collectors, writers, painters, educators are an example. Totally. Okay, so to finish, this is what artists most want. This is what I found on this tour. This is my 79th stop, by the way, out of 100. We've met 5,200 people on this tour so far. And we're going to Alaska in April. I'm going to New Orleans, Colorado in the fall, although I shouldn't do any more. But Nottingham, England, we're going many places. But this is pretty consistent in all of the places we went. Validation, permission, and opportunities. First of all, you don't need permission, and women often ask for that. And I say to my fellow people who identify as women, we don't need that. We don't. We don't need any permission whatsoever. So oftentimes people ask me, what are the keys to sustaining a creative life? So I always say, you have to buy my books. That's the first thing. And then the second thing I say, here's a cheat sheet. Okay, you ready? Keep your expenses low. Every artist I know who can sustain their creative life with ease keeps those expenses low. So for example, if you live here in Minnesota and you love living here and it's good for your well-being, then and I just remembered something I have to say at the end of this, and it's inexpensive and it's working for you, then live here. You don't have to live in New York. You don't have to live in these other places. Believe me, I really thought about, should I move back to New York? But my friends were pulling me there, and my well-being, it was important to me to be back in that place. But financially, it's very difficult. Persistence, apply for everything that fits, meaning that if you, let's say, make abstract work, you wouldn't send your work to a curator who only is interested in figuration, right? That doesn't make any sense. Do the work, do the research. Oftentimes, artists just expect referrals, and sometimes those referrals create paths, but maybe they're not right for you. So I think it's really important to understand for yourself who's in your community and what's right for you in your journey. Share, cultivate, and create your own community. That's the core. My core group of people that I exchange and have discourse with, Harag, Sharon, Austin Thomas, Kate Butler, Kate Butler, I don't know why I got their names mixed up, Kate Shepard, many different people in my life, but small core, we constantly exchange with one another. It's a natural extension of our friendship, and it's my community, and I know it's possible, and everybody I know who has developed community together, it flourishes and thrives. And then think of the other person first. Oftentimes we ask what we need first rather than developing relationship with somebody first and understanding who we're talking to. And I don't think there's any such thing as a rejection. It's only a difference of opinion. It's too personal to think that somebody's rejecting us just because we're not getting something. Maybe it's not the right time, maybe it's not the right fit, but it's just a difference of opinion. So don't take to heart. Most artists I know keep going and they keep applying for things. And finally, generosity yields generosity. So artists, what's really important, I think, to remember is that artists not only contribute to the creative economy tremendously, but you know what we do the best? We contribute to the well-being of others more than anything, and we have to remember that ourselves, because that's what we do so much. That's our gift. We bounce back from failure like nobody else, no other field. We can create things from nothing. We can apply all of these things outside of our artistic practice. And I actually don't like that word practice because it means something of tentative, but our life as an artist. So as artists. So I'm rushing through this because I know Jay wants to have a conversation, and I'm just going to end here for our conversation. Thank you. Sorry about that. I was like rushing through that. No, I was going on a marathon. Was I talking too fast? Okay, oh, that's good. Sounds like you're from New York. You know, I'm not from New York originally. I'm from South Philadelphia, and they're raised outside of Washington, D.C. But I loved Minnesota. I loved being here. I love coming back here. Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you, Sharon. It's really great to have you back here, and great to have your energy around as well.
Thanks.
So I want to start off by asking you just a couple of really simple questions, maybe. So what does being a culture producer mean to you? I mean, that's probably more challenging question to ask than it sounds like, but what does that mean? Because to my mind, it speaks to the way that the definition of being an artist has evolved over time. You know, if I think back 20, 25 years ago, how one might define an artistic practice has evolved to what defining an artistic practice is. And so how would you define that, or is it beyond definition?
No, I think for me, in the context of this book, I thought of a culture producer as someone who not only has a leg in, let's say, commercial art world, where they're showing their work. And the reason for that is, in my first tour, I had, can you hear me okay? I'm sure you can, because I'm so loud. But at my first tour, at many of the talks I gave, the response from artists was, well, you can't do a whole bunch of other stuff and have a gallery. And I'm like, are you kidding? Of course you can. And then the public's response that, like I said, in hearing culture producer with interest versus hearing the title as an artist. Mm-hmm. And so for me, a culture producer, at least in the context of the book, is artists who have a leg in the art world but also create bridges into the public. And I really believe that. I believe that artists who engage, not social practitioners or social engagement per se, but just engage actively in our society. And that may mean that if someone's just even painting flowers in their studio, but they just simply share work of other artists on Instagram, or maybe they have a dinner with artists once a week or once a month to share resources. Some kind of way that's collective that I see that is the definition of that today.
So, just thinking about that a little bit. So some of that is about giving back to your own community, i.e. the artist community, and some of it's also giving in a generous kind of spirit, developing a relationship with communities that are outside of the artist community.
Yes.
And can you point to an example or two of people from the book who you would say are doing, one or the other?
Well, Edgar.
Yeah.
So Edgar is a great example. So I'm cheating because I already gave him as an example.
That's okay.
But like he gives a lot to artists and nonprofit organizations by hosting events and opening his studio for a lottery exchange, not just, quote, studio visits. But then he did that nonprofit organization. But also Brett Wallace, who's in this book, who a lot of people don't know of. I like choosing people for these books, too. I'm a big proponent for the 99%. So most of the people in my books are from the 99% of artists.
Yeah.
And he actually was hired by LinkedIn partially because he's an artist.
Mm-hmm.
So here's an artist in this corporate environment. He's actively helping. I think he helped 50 startups to get going, but here's an artist doing that. And how is that different? Is somebody actually enacting culture within those startups? And that's amazing for all of us. So here's this guy at the helm saying, hey, you got to pay attention. Artists are actually active in our community. You're going to hire them. You're going to work with them. You're going to respect and engage in culture. I mean, that's a great example, too.
Sure. So one of the things that I think is characteristic of artists in both of your books is that kind of sense that they blur the boundaries between art and, quote unquote, the rest of their life.
Yeah.
And, so that the distinction, I'm making art here for this number of hours, and then over here I'm working at this, whatever this might be. And, so if I were to record my hours, on a time clock, I punch in here, I punch out, I punch in here, I punch back. That seems like an old notion of what being a creative person is.
True.
And I'm just wondering if you could say, how do you think those artists who have sort of moved beyond that paradigm have done it? What do you think is the sort of key to doing that?
So that's a great question. A lot of people ask me about how do these artists and myself balance. I mean, I could ask you that question. I have asked you that question.
You have.
But you should maybe answer that question. But I think that I'll just briefly say, and if you want to say how you do that, these artists, first of all, the keys are they know themselves really well. They give in to themselves. They don't try to do what they think that other people are doing. Mm-hmm. They do what fits for themselves. So, for example, Julie Blackman, who's in this first book, she's amazing. She lives in Springfield, Missouri. She's a very well-known photographer. I think she has 7 or 8 galleries all over the world. And her photographer work has been on the cover of Time magazine, Real Simple magazine, many different publications. She chose to stay in Springfield, Missouri because her family's there. And she raised 3 children there, and her darkroom is in her house. And that's comfortable for her. And then she travels from there, but she knew that for herself. So that's the first thing. To have that knowing what works for you personally. Like
sure.
When I said
what's going to sustain you?
Yeah, like
just in terms of who you are as a person.
Right, making the choices not professionally, but making them personally, like first.
Sure.
Because I think when we make that personally, everything gets a lot easier because we then can work within our comfort, right? I mean, do you do that too?
Yeah, to the degree that I can.
But you love what you do.
But I love what I do.
Yeah.
So, I reached a certain point in my career, which was more focused on quote unquote galleries and showing in galleries, doing commissions. and teaching to deciding that I wanted to have an impact on a larger group of people, i.e., the whole of a school, if possible. And so I shifted my focus as a creative person from art making and influencing sort of student by student in the classroom to shaping a much larger entity for the benefit, hopefully, of a much larger number of people.
Of course.
So, I wouldn't say it's exactly a completely selfless thing, but it's a thing that is certainly as satisfying as making art has been.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I said this before, just because you have a job doesn't make you any less of an artist. There's no such thing as a day job. People have to throw that out. Because when people say, oh, I have a day job, what are you, a part-time night artist then? That doesn't make any sense. So we choose where we want to be in our lives. So back to thanks for sharing that, because it's always good, I think, for everybody to know that you couldn't do this without being an artist, really.
True.
I think that's very true.
Yeah.
I think also the way that some of these people in this book do it is that they manage things by collectively, like I said, asking for help, leaning on other people, but going with the flow, but yet at the same time having their eye on the prize. So like that punching in and punching out, that doesn't really happen.
But leaning on other people implies sometimes people are leaning on you as well.
Yeah,
so,
they are.
There's a real reciprocity to
cultural
that.
Reciprocity.
Yeah. No, I agree. If you are having a creative practice, you are invariably going to run into hardships. You mentioned you had a house fire.
Right.
I think one of the big challenges that I see for artists is, sustaining this over the arc of one's life is really difficult, because there are a lot of things that can pull you away from that. Raising a family, just the difficulties of how much time you can actually, kind of do what you consider to be the creative part of your creative life, still making some of those distinctions. And then, the sort of pull of America to make another choice, because, oftentimes it's the pull of, as you said, if you can keep your expenses low, you're more likely to be able to do it. But, people don't necessarily always want to keep their expenses low.
Right.
So how do you see the artists that have sustained a creative life working out those balances?
First of all, they all have one thing in common, which I do too, is that we have to make our work. We're driven, hugely driven. So maybe there's a setback where there's a fire, right? That's okay. I'll be patient, but maybe I can do other things. Mm-hmm. Maybe it doesn't mean that I'm going to be in a studio to make work. They adapt. That's what I think the key is that there's this adaptive malleability.
Sure.
And not letting things like a fire be so devastating to end other things. And it hasn't at all. I mean, the upside was that we did this tour, and my sister-in-law said to me, in your marriage, it's either going to break your marriage or it's going to make it better. Well, I didn't think it had to be better, but it was awesome and amazing, right, honey? So, I think that there are other factors, but people get sick too. There's health, a lot, and well-being. Yeah. Matthew Delegate in this book talks about how swimming is essential for him to think in order to make his work. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes, I think, as artists, we are so professionally driven that we forget who we are and what we need as individuals. I'm the first one to say that I absolutely do, because I forget what time it is, and I just want to keep working because I love it, but it's catching up with me. I mean, can I just give an example? Does everybody know who Chris Rock is? Oh my God, I love Chris Rock. So Chris Rock said in this one stand-up, I don't know, it was on HBO 5 years ago. He said there's a real difference between a job and a career. A big difference. He used to shuck shellfish at a Red Lobster. That's B-52s. Red Lobster in Queens, where I live now, near where I live in Jackson Heights. And he would look at the clock and see what time it was, but his watch was a little faster than the clock. And understanding and like stressing over when he should leave. Whereas a career, he doesn't have enough time, right? I don't have enough time. I think the other thing is just always keeping mindful how fortunate and privileged we are as artists. We're not mining coal. We're not waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning, or some of us aren't, flipping burgers somewhere, or doing things we don't want to do. Everybody in here has a privilege because we've decided to be here, right, in this moment, and honoring that privilege. And I think also as artists, to be able to not only honor that privilege, sharing that privilege. And for me, my big advocacy too is for women and people of color to be able to raise the bar as we should have been all along.
So I'll bring up a subject that you spoke to a little bit. You graduated from Yale with $115,000 of student debt.
Yeah.
And you figured out a way to retire that, still live a creative life, all of that. So what would you say to somebody has
that debt?
Well, either has debt or just doesn't. I mean, a number of people are going to have debt. I had debt getting out of school as well.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow. How do you manage your debt?
Isn't that amazing?
How do you manage your debt?
I just kept paying those things off, and I...
Steady,
yeah.
Yeah.
Till it was done.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was. It worked well.
That's a big deal.
But it was a challenge at the time.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't hauling in a big amount of money. But I think, there are going to be some artists who come out of school and they've got, parents paid the full ride. They've got some resources to start their life with. And then other artists who already feel somewhat behind the eight ball in terms of having the resources or having the sort of mental freedom from that. Can you talk a little bit about how to deal with that?
Yeah. So first of all, if you need money, you got to get a job. I think that's first and foremost, because you got to survive. That's number one. And what I did when I got out of college, I had all that debt. I thought, okay, I asked myself, what am I good at, right? What can I be good at? What can I, how can I use some of the things, skills? Well, I love to file and organize. I really do. I love it. I love organizing. I used to organize like as a little job before too for somebody and got paid for it. That was amazing. So because I love to organize and I love to do paperwork and stuff like that, I got an office manager position, but also the job provided me something I couldn't afford, a computer. So when I stayed afterwards, I used that computer to get me out of that job to pay that debt.
Very
Position yourself in a place where the job's going to work for you, not just make that money. But also the person who hired me is one of my dearest friends. We've stayed in touch all these years. And he came from little means, Bill Schwinghammer. I love this guy, lighting design company. And you never know also connectivity and meeting people and how that helps. He now is this very famous lighting designer. He has a lot of resources. And he came to me recently and said, I'd like to open a gallery and give to the art world. And that's another way that things cycle. And now he has a gallery that just opened in New York last year. So I think that position yourself, meeting people, also position yourself in a job that not only satisfies you financially, professionally, but how it does professionally. Like Jean Shin in this book, she got a job at the Whitney Museum in a department, let's say I think it was human relations or human services or something, human resources, and then worked her way up to curatorial. And through that, met a community of curators that she has since worked with, got to a place where she then left that job. And so I think that's number one. Number two, there are resources out there for people to manage debt. I think be smart about your debt. Understand how we did. We moved it around. Vince was really helpful in creative ways of thinking about debt, not just negotiating debt and getting, I think a lot of times, like in SVA, I talk to my students as young artists, you are all adults. You signed up for this. You need to act as adults and prepare yourself financially and use resources out there to know how to manage that. So we have to grow up at a certain point. And I think just because people think of ourselves, and sometimes we think of ourselves as separate people from society, we're not. We're functioning taxpayers. Artists are also small businesses, and we have to sustain ourselves and be responsible for ourselves.
So I'm just going to ask one more question.
Yes, I want to open it up.
Bill Powhida, who's a friend of mine.
Aha!
Yeah.
Oh, he's in this book, very opinionated.
Yeah.
I love that guy.
Oh, yeah, very opinionated.
Oh, my God, I love him. But I used to be afraid of him, actually. I was terrified of him.
Well,
and then Jen Dalton, in my first book, introduced me to him. He's the sweetest guy in person.
He's a very nice guy.
Yes, but on the outside, he can be terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, I think
not that you should be terrified of him, but...
No, you shouldn't. Anyway, Bill talks about a couple of different things. He talks about the symbolic value of art versus the pragmatic value of art. And he also talks about the artist being useful as an artist, which is really an interesting of turn of phrase, because it... I think, what does it mean to be useful as an artist?
I don't know how to answer that. That's for everybody. What do you think? And I know Bill would have many different definitions.
He would have a lot of definitions.
You should get him here. That would be amazing. He would be amazing because he's so sharp, he's super talented, he's so smart, very generous, and then he's tough.
He's tough on the whole
on the art world.
Very tough on the art world.
You guys should follow him. It's at Powhida. That's it. Powhida, and tell him I sent you. That would be hilarious, actually. He's great. Anyway, sorry. What do you think about useful?
Well, I think it's really an interesting thing because I think, when you think about the sort of symbolic value of art side of things, there's very much this feeling that, art is something that's a luxury commodity.
Right.
That's, in some ways, for a rarefied few to purchase. It helps support the artists who are fortunate enough to have people who purchase it, but what is it really contributing to the world? It may also be in a very closed loop kind of conversation as well, in that, the people who see it are people who go to galleries, maybe already converted in terms of the artist's political message already, as opposed to reaching a wider audience. And even if they're buying it, in some ways they're kind of undercutting the subversive value of that artwork if they're buying a political piece of art and they're, multimillionaires who are doing that.
There's huge problems.
There's a lot of problems in there. And so I guess, there's a bunch of ways to think about what it means to be useful as an artist. I mean, one way is, how do I contribute to a community that I'm involved with?
Right.
How do I make a difference in somebody else's life?
Right.
How do I make sure that I'm kind of doing something that, even if I'm still doing something very aesthetic, how is that lifting somebody else's life just by being able to see that work?
Aesthetics are political, though.
Well, they are.
Can be. Oftentimes they are. Look at also abstraction in the 1930s. Where a lot of people thought that was, at that time, degenerate. You're right. And so I think it's extremely important to think that aesthetics can have importance. But even just asking those questions, I think an artist can answer it. And I see where you saw that in the book, where he talks about what is the value and what's the value of an artist. At the end of the day.
Yeah. So, questions. Anybody have questions? Yep.
When did you learn that vulnerability is important to be a part of spreading art?
So the question is, when did you learn that vulnerability is important in what aspect? In spreading art? In the supporting art. Well, I think vulnerability yields strength, doesn't it? Like when we can reveal ourselves and our truth, it yields a lot of strength. And For example, did anybody read Hyperallergic yesterday? The Harag Vartanian about Art Forum. Don't buy Art Forum. Cancel your subscription. I'm saying that. Truth. You need to read that article. But he spoke his truth and got revealed even more so why the art world's been very sleepy about the issue with Art Forum and sexual harassment. And so, but what came of that is that we all were collectively came together. And I know that it's extremely vulnerable for people to take those risks like we do every day. But the upside is that we get closer to our own truth. But when did I learn that? I mean, I learned it by default. I think it's just a survival mechanism for me. But you know what else? I learned it when I didn't care so much anymore. So for many years, I cared, like, what should I be as an artist? And then I was like, screw it, I'm done with caring. And then once I stopped caring, everything started flooding in. And then I wish I had known that before. But really good question.
Well, I think it also goes back to, how do you define what being an artist is? And if you
Right.
feel vulnerable, even with using the term artist to apply to yourself, or you feel like there's this term, the Imposter Syndrome, in some ways that you are sort of, Maya Angelou speaks about her feeling like she's an imposter. I mean, and we all think of her as like, wow, I mean, my God, what an incredible author, blah, blah, blah. But, I think there are people who have achieved high attainment who feel somehow or other that they have lived a completely the life of an imposter, even though they've accomplished a great deal. And so it seems like that vulnerability is sort of acknowledging your self-doubt, acknowledging the difficulties that there are that you've got, and being able to share those difficulties, which is, I think, one of the benefits of your books, is that shares.
They do.
People share real stuff.
Oh, I pushed him in that second book.
Yeah.
Steve Lambert is that essay, you guys, guys and women, everybody's very, very powerful.
Yeah.
Okay.
Somebody else.
Thank you for that.
Another question?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mina! Woo!
Thanks. How to scale up while living and sustaining as a cultural producer, as in what to do, what to watch out for?
Say again?
How to scale up while living and sustaining?
How to scale it up?
Yes.
What do you mean scale it up?
So basically, or in alternative words, how to break away from gig economy while working as a cultural producer.
I mean, I don't know how to answer that other than, the gig economy is, I don't know how to answer that. Are you talking about branding?
Freelancing or starting from smaller projects. Where do you see that, okay, you have crossed a threshold, or what to do when we have met the first goal, which is living and sustaining?
Everybody has to find where their journey is for themselves, and there's all different ways of sustaining. It's not just financial. So, and there's all different economies as well. So, in ways in which people work, it's a huge question, and it's all individual. So I can't really answer that in a way that because everybody has different ways of dealing with that. As far as freelance and going from a gig economy to something that's fully sustainable, every artist I know, it's all patchwork. And it's not a 9-to-5 existence. I don't think, actually, if you're looking for that, I think that the beauty of being self-employed is you get to determine that for yourself. That's where you make it. So you make it your own schedule. That's how you raise it. That's how you raise the bar.
But I also think another thing is, so you've got this patchwork kind of a bunch of things that you're doing, freelance gigs or whatever it might be, and maybe sort of some other employment of some sort. At a certain point, one thing's going to sort of wither away, and another thing's going to grow, and something's going to replace it, and I think it all evolves as you keep your mind open and yourself open to other opportunities that happen. Scaling it up, that's kind of it can be it can be a plan. I mean, I think it's a good idea to say, where do I want to be in 5 years? Where do I want to be in 10 years? At least have some sort of sense of where you're headed. But being aware along the way that you're going to find there are many things that may pull you off of that plan, and so you revise the plan, and you may find that something grows, and all of a sudden you're not in the gig economy anymore because you've got one steady gig that you're doing, which may be your own business, but it's moved from a patchwork of things to something that's fully sustainable from the perspective of you're just doing what you want to be doing all of the time, whatever that might be.
But can I add to that? I think also, like, the reason why I was looking at you, about the gig economy, I don't really think of an artist's life as far as a gig economy. I don't. So I think it's just this patchwork. Sure, we're freelance, but as you said, like, things evolve. And I do think it's based on what you need and want at the end of the day, that goal setting.
Well, and I think, just taking Sharon for an example, I mean, if you hadn't sort of landed on the idea of editing these books and doing these books, you would be doing something else.
I would.
Yeah.
I totally would.
And it would be as creative and, it would be different.
Yeah.
Somebody else with a question. Yeah, Dawn.
In this working project-to-project world, a lot of times we're in positions where we have to set our prices. And you showed a question earlier where someone asked, they said, how do you figure out the value of your labor, and then how do you establish that, communicate that to other people so you don't feel exploited? How do other artists answer that question? How would you answer that question?
Because there are people who know the answers to that. So you go and ask for that help. That's what galleries are good at, too, is they know the field. So you ask a lot of different people about what is the value of this today. The value of something is only what the market's going to bear. And so you have to know the market. So who knows the market? Usually galleries know that market. So here's where cultivating community really counts, is that you ask people that you really trust, like whether it be people coming to your studio or maybe even sending images to people, but in some way translating your work to that person and asking, can I ask you, why are you asking that question?
I'm just thinking, I'm in a room full of animators and comic artists and people that are...
Right, okay. I'm glad to know that.
People that work project to project. And a lot
Correct.
of times people say, I need this project. What are you going to charge me?
Right, and I think it's very difficult when it's unregulated. But there are ranges of what people charge and they receive in a community. And I think developing mentors and understanding who you can lean on for that advice is a pretty good idea. So that's why I asked, because I think this does apply. It's not just galleries, but it applies in all fields in asking sort of experts who understand that field or that market.
Yeah.
So I'm interested, Sharon, and so through your work, how do you encourage museums not only to work with artists as cultural producers, but also to help encourage them to have artists live sustainably or have a sustainable practice?
I ask them for money. So when I do a project, I give them a budget. And I say I need to, that's where the preparation comes, sort of like the debt thing, that we have to be responsible for ourselves, right? So I present a budget when I do a project, and Vince has really helped me with this. We work together. He's my project manager. But I when I do have an exhibition, I lean on things like wage, and then my friends, like you were talking about, like the people I know are very successful at this. And then there's also, I do a lot of professional development. Taking professional development, like this Artist Thrive thing, which is a free rubric that's, like I said, it's evolving, it's organic. But reaching for resources. Also, New York Foundation for the Arts has a resource. There are many It's like an artist resource you can go to at nyfa.org. It's not just for New York, it's international. And I know that there's a great career services person here, and you can tap into where, are you going to school here?
I'm a professor.
You're-
Professional practice.
So you're a professor in professional practice?
Yeah.
Interesting that you asked me that
I
question.
mean, I feel like as an artist, I've often worked with institutions that I have a hard time asking them to pay.
Why do you have, well, what is well? You need to know what well is.
Yeah.
So I can't rely on anybody except myself. So when I go and work with a museum, it's always a collaboration. Everybody I work with is a collaboration, but I have to be responsible in that collaboration. I have to come up with a sustainable budget. And then I make the decision. If they can't pay me, I can either do it and get other things from them. There are a lot of in-kind things that you can get instead of cash. But you have to think of those things in advance and have that roster, that list of things, that checklist that you go in with as sort of an arsenal in a way. And then, and to be professional, to have exchange, to say, what can we do as partners to be able to do this together? Here are my needs, what are your needs? And then see where they come together. Good museums have great resources. That's why I like working with them, because they can apply for grants. And I don't have, well, I do get grants too, but I don't have, I'm not a nonprofit organization. So, but I can help them get those grants if I have this document from me saying how much I need to go forward. So, and maybe the institution doesn't have the funding either, but there are many ways to work together to do that, but you have to come up with that. That's where the work comes in. And I can give you resources later. I can talk to you later. I left my information here if anybody wants to email me, but I confess I'm 400 emails behind right now, but if, I know it's really amazing. I have to get, and I don't like writing one-sentence emails. That's my fault. But if you want to email me, just tell me who you are, and I will get back to you, I swear to God, at some point. But I do believe I can give you those resources, but we can do this. I mean, 80% of the things I've got in my life as an artist are from cold calls, meaning not picking up, don't ever do that, but not picking up the phone and calling, but actually approach without referrals. These are relationships that I've built over many years. And this is not the last time I'm going to see Jay, sorry.
No.
I'm
glad.
Oh, thanks, relieved. But we then continue, it's not just about the event or the exhibition, it's a whole life.
One more question. Somebody who hasn't asked one? Yeah.
I was wondering, like, obviously over time you've developed these relationships with this group of people that you exchange with.
Yeah.
Millennials are now in a situation, I feel like, with the idea of, like, maybe there is a day job, maybe your schedule isn't as practical, maybe your social life is like something that becomes a burden, or instead of this idea of this is my community and I'm cultivating and I want to be there for them and I need them to be there for me. We're at this time where it's a little bit hard outside of the college setting when you're not in class with these people or you're not spending time working on projects, how you do that in your daily life outside and then activate that community so they trust you and there is like an authentic relationship.
I think it's just, well, first of all, there's no such thing as a day job, so I have to, sorry. You've positioned yourself in choosing that position, that job, and you have responsibility for yourself. I think that, yeah, it can be really hard. I mean, I had many jobs and never had that support, and still don't have any other support other than ourselves. But I think that it's just about like building friendships. It's pretty easy in that way. That cultural reciprocity and exchange is not very formal. It's more like, hey, I saw that you took a picture at work of your mug, I'm gonna share that. It sounds so stupid. I'm just talking about like little tiny things. And then those things really build up. Like, I love Twitter because I get to meet people on Twitter and actually meet them in person. But I'm in a great conversation with somebody in Kenya right now who I want to go to Africa based on that friendship that we developed on Twitter. And she has my book right now. And that just having time in between because I work all the time too, I understand. And I have a lot of friends who are really much younger than me. I'm co-editing a 4th book with someone who's Jessica Lynn, who's the co-founder of Arts Black. She's a critic who writes on specifically Black women artists. She's amazing, but she's 25 years younger than me. I think that's the other key, is that reach across age groups, and collaborate with all different people. But she does the same thing. It's sort of like these sort of nuances and little things, and paying attention to them, and doesn't have to be this formal structure. The core people that I collaborate with, it happens like breathing. It doesn't happen formally at all. And it's like liquid. We're sitting around and all of a sudden we start drawing together. And then I think, oh, I'm gonna have people come in my studio and we'll draw together in this conversation. Oh, no, I'm gonna now show them. Do you see, like, it just happened because we were doodling. So it doesn't have to be so formal. I think it's paying attention, keeping it in your mind.
So,
Last question.
okay.
Really fast question. Okay, so like there's this kind of like idea about networking and like.
Oh, I hate that word.
Right. Okay. But like, you know, like.
Community building.
Okay, community building, where like we've kind of been taught over the years that it's about like being in the right place at the right time, knowing the right people. Like that's a thing. That's a thing that like has been established by like an artistic community. Like it's kind of like if you're gonna make it, quote unquote, make it.
Oh,
it's
make
put
what?
yourself on
Yeah,
art.
right.
I'm just using like phrases.
Totally. And I love all the phrases. I'm just going against them because it's used so often as that stereotype for an artist.
Right. So I'm saying like this is kind of like the idea. Are you just proposing that that's not the reality and that it's a lot easier than that and that it's a lot more accessible than that?
Correct.
And okay.
Okay, so
Like, I want to believe you and.
start doing it.
Well, you know, I
So I think
I'm
it's
gonna say-
unpacking that. It's
I'm going to
unpacking
say
that.
something.
Go.
You know,
For like 25 hours a week, and it's like it's not because I've like placed myself in that position. It's because like I'm a student with that who like
Right.
come from a family with a lot of money and like
Right.
literally.
so that goes back to that goes back to something Sharon said at the very beginning, sort of a question about needs and wants. So you need that job. You also need an education. So, you know, in order to get the education, you've got to have the job, and you got to, you know, do all these things that are part of a need, you know, because you want to get somewhere. And so in order to get where you want to go, you need to do, you know, certain things to get there. And, you know, some days those things seem like a pain in the ass or really, you know, challenging. How am I going to possibly do all my work when I've got to work 25 hours a week and all of that? And yet somehow or other, if the, you know, where you want to get to is powerful enough, you'll figure it out. And then there'll be some relief too. You know, it's not, you know, as difficult as those challenges may be, I'm sure there are moments of maybe euphoria or, you know, just look at what I accomplished. Look at, you know, where I've gotten to. Look at where my work's gotten to. You know, so I think you have to look for the things that are positive reinforcements, even when you're facing difficult and challenging times. And that's where I think, to go back to networking versus community building, that's where your community can really help you out, because, you know, you've got other people who are in the same boat as you are. You can, you know, cry on each other's shoulders or, you know, have some solace. You know, I think that is really valuable, and that doesn't cost anything, and it's not networking. It's just, you know, relying on your friends.
I think that I understand your I wouldn't say pessimism, but maybe your doubt in this.
Anxiety.
Anxiety.
Maybe.
That's a great word. I don't know if that's correct.
Well, it's not like that. I'm just like curious. I'm just being critical of like the information I'm being given. I just mean like,
I think that's good.
yeah, I just think it's interesting that we're like artists and like as artists we're not flipping burgers. Like I'm definitely flipping burgers.
My point is, do you want to choose to do that, or is there another job that you can choose? You do have actually access to other positions, and I actually don't. I think flipping burgers is probably a lot better than being a gallerina, you know. So, but everybody has their own what they want to do and what their aspirations are. I also have to that word, like that thing of making it. I just never understood that because I don't know what it is that people want to make, you know. And I think I'm just saying that because I think that there is no one path to doing this. And there's many different ways of getting there. And as someone who had a lot of debt too and getting out, I did a ton of different things. But I think it's just trying all different things to get where you want to go. I just don't know where you want to go. Do you?
Well, sometimes it's a reality of like, I want to put a, like, blatantly for millennials, it's a little bit of a reality of like, I need food in my fridge this week.
Then you get a job.
Right. And then in that job, you're around people that aren't necessarily artists, that are
Right.
somewhat like attacking the idea of you being an artist because you're in a, not in an artistic environment that people are like privy to.
Right, but maybe you can try to find positions that you can be in a different environment. I mean, the idea too is that oftentimes I find that artists don't think that way. They just take whatever job that they can get.
Yeah, and I feel like that kind of like artist taking whatever job they can get is like to some degree for some people, like in terms of accessibility, like there's not just like gallery jobs sitting around.
Well, what is the
Well,
gallery?
but also,
Just an example.
Sure.
I'm not saying it's
Sure.
but also for some people, having a job where you don't take the job home at all, it's like if you're flipping burgers,
Right.
it's not like you're thinking about, I'm going to make my flipping much better tomorrow than it was yesterday.
all there are shifts on your feet, like you have to bring the job home like physically.
Well, you definitely, I mean, depending on the physical or mental demands of the job, a certain amount of that does go with you. There's no question about it. And I think, you know, then you need to think, is that the right job for me? If it's very physically demanding, and yet what I do as an artist also has its own physical demands, is there another kind of job that will pay me the same amount of money, but be less demanding in whatever way that job is demanding? Or,
It's not so much about the job, but about the reality of what you're preaching, I think is maybe what you're.
The reality of what I'm preaching is that it is, sure, it's a lot of hard work. This is not glamorous. And I did say the reality too that 0.001% of artists make a living just from that one source. It's a patchwork. So many people that I meet out in the world and on these tours and in these books have found all different ways for themselves how to sustain their lives. There's all different ways to sustain a creative life. And the keys are that what I put up there, keeping your expenses low, but being thoughtful about your decisions. I think that a lot of times artists oftentimes feel desperate to be able to make that work and have time to make that work, so they don't necessarily plan on trying to keep their expenses low or putting themselves in certain positions so that it's healthier for them, whereas then they just go to try to get a job immediately and maybe be in New York City to try to have access. And that, or a different kind of access, and that may not work. And so I think it's also trying and different things, different platforms. But having that community is absolutely key to this, and having that exchange with others to be able to build opportunities for one another.
Yeah, and I think that community part, I agree with you, and like I feel like for me personally, like that's the best way for this kind of stuff to progress. I just feel like a lot of the stuff that you're talking about is like not necessarily acknowledging like the systems that are working.
I'm acknowledging the systems that don't work.
Or, no, I mean like that's like
the systems that are at work, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, social systems.
Yeah.
In terms of like these plans and these, yeah, I don't know. I'm just trying to start a conversation, but
I think it's great. I mean, and I love the inquiry and the questioning, because then you're questioning for yourself inevitably. And that's what you should be doing.
Well, thank you everybody for coming. Sharon, thank you.